There's a voice recording that sat quietly in legal archives for years. A voice, slow, tired, but unmistakably his, speaking about dreams he never got to finish. When that recording finally surfaced for the public to hear, it did not just reveal words. It revealed a man the world thought it already knew, and proved that it barely knew him at all. This is not simply the story of how Michael Jackson died. It is the story of what he said in his final weeks, what those words meant, and why they still matter more than a decade later. Before we go further, ask yourself this. When someone speaks their private thoughts out loud, thinking no one but a trusted few are listening, do we finally hear the truth? Or do we only hear what exhaustion and fear allow a person to say in that moment? A voice, recorded in secrecy. In the spring of 2009, as rehearsals for the This Is It concert series intensified at Staples Center, Michael Jackson's personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, began recording private conversations with his patient. The stated reason was medical documentation. The reality, many believe, was something closer to self-protection, a doctor building a record in case questions were ever asked about the treatment he was providing. One of those recordings, made on May 10, 2009, became central to the criminal trial that followed Jackson's death. It was not meant for public ears. It was a private, unguarded moment between a patient and the man he trusted with his health, a trust that would prove catastrophically misplaced. When prosecutors played the recording in court in 2011, the room went silent. Jackson's voice was slurred, heavy, weighted down by whatever had been administered to him that night. And yet, underneath the exhaustion, there was clarity of purpose that surprised almost everyone who heard it. Why would a man in that physical state still speak with such conviction about the future? What does that tell us about what was really driving him in his final months? What he actually said. In the recording, Jackson spoke about children, not in the abstract, but with real intention. He described wanting to build the largest children's hospital in the world. A place, he said, where kids could receive treatment without the fear and sterility of ordinary hospitals. He spoke of it as something bigger than charity. He described it as unfinished business, a purpose he still needed to fulfill. He also spoke about his music, describing his songs as vehicles for compassion, ways of taking his own pain and turning it into something that could reach someone else who was suffering. This was not new territory for him. He had said similar things in interviews for decades. But hearing it in that fragile, slowed voice, so close to the end of his life, gave the words a different weight entirely. Listen carefully to what is missing from that recording. There is no mention of anger, no mention of the tabloids that had hounded him for years, no bitterness about the trials he had endured. Instead, there's a tired man talking about children he had never met and a hospital that would never be built. What does it mean when someone's final documented thoughts are about giving rather than grievance? The condition behind the voice. To understand why his voice sounded the way it did, you have to understand what was happening to his body in those final weeks. Michael Jackson had suffered from severe insomnia for years, a condition that intensified under the pressure of preparing 50 concert dates at the O2 Arena in London. Sleep, something most people take for granted, had become something he could no longer find on his own. Dr. Murray had been administering propofol, a powerful surgical anesthetic never intended for use as a sleep aid in Jackson's private residence, without the monitoring equipment or trained support staff required for its safe use. The recording captured Jackson under the influence of exactly this kind of sedation, a chemically induced state that should never have existed outside of an operating room. This raises an uncomfortable question. Was the man in that recording speaking his true, unfiltered thoughts? Or was he speaking through a haze that no one should have allowed him to be in? Perhaps the honest answer is both things at once. Sedation may have loosened his guard, but it did not manufacture his dreams. The hospital, the compassion, the sense of unfinished purpose, those were not invented by a drug. They were simply spoken more plainly because the usual walls a person keeps up were no longer standing. Why the recording went public. For nearly 2 years after Jackson's death, this recording remained sealed as part of an ongoing criminal investigation. It surfaced only during the involuntary manslaughter trial of Dr. Conrad Murray in the fall of 2011, played for the jury as evidence of Jackson's mental and physical state under the doctor's care. The prosecution's intent was clear. They wanted the jury, and by extension the public, to hear exactly what condition Jackson was in on the nights leading up to his death. It was not released as a tribute. It was released as evidence of negligence. And yet, once it reached the public, its meaning shifted. What was intended as a legal exhibit became something far more personal, a final documented glimpse of a man's inner world. Fans who heard the recording described a strange mixture of emotions. Grief, certainly. But also a kind of intimacy they had never expected to have with someone so famous. For a moment, the distance between icon and audience collapsed. How often does the public get to hear someone's true, unrehearsed voice, especially someone who had spent their entire adult life performing? A pattern that repeats. What makes this recording so significant is not just what it reveals about Michael Jackson individually. It reveals a pattern that repeats across the entertainment industry whenever extraordinary fame collides with private exhaustion. The person at the center becomes so valuable as a commercial asset that the people managing that asset, whether intentionally or through simple negligence, stop asking whether the person underneath can actually sustain the demands being placed on them. Michael Jackson was carrying an estimated $400 million in debt heading into 2009. The This Is It concert series was designed to resolve that debt, secure his children's financial future, and re-establish him as a dominant force in music after years of legal battles and public scrutiny. 50 shows, a schedule that would challenge a performer half his age and perfect health. Those closest to him during rehearsals described two very different men depending on the day. Some days, he moved across the stage with the same precision that had defined his career for decades. Other days, he appeared visibly unwell, shivering in warm weather, struggling through choreography he had once performed effortlessly. The recording captured the private cost of maintaining that public illusion night after night. The final rehearsal. Hours before the recording device fell silent for the last time on the night of June 24th, Jackson had just finished his final rehearsal at Staples Center. Witnesses described an emotionally intense performance of Earth Song, delivered with a level of commitment that seemed almost disconnected from the physical frailty visible in private. It was as if the stage gave him strength that his body could no longer produce on its own. He returned home in the early hours of June 25th. What followed has been documented extensively in court testimony. Sedatives administered over several hours, failed attempts to induce natural sleep, and finally, propofol, delivered in a bedroom instead of a hospital without the safeguards that drug demands. By late morning, Michael Jackson was unresponsive. By early afternoon, he was gone. The people who heard it. First, before the world ever heard that recording, a small group of people did, investigators, attorneys, and eventually 12 jurors sitting in a Los Angeles courtroom. For them, it was not entertainment or nostalgia. It was evidence, a piece of a larger puzzle they were being asked to assemble in order to decide whether a doctor's negligence amounted to a crime. Jurors later described the moment the recording played as one of the most difficult parts of the trial. Some looked down, others glanced toward Jackson's family, seated just a few rows away, hearing their father, brother, and son's voice for the first time since his death, altered and slowed by the very substance that would soon end his life. It is one thing to read a transcript of someone's final private words. It is another thing entirely to hear them spoken with all the pauses, the effort, and the fatigue intact. For the prosecution, the recording served its intended purpose. It painted a picture of a patient in obvious distress, someone who should have been receiving urgent medical attention rather than being left in the care of a single physician operating far outside standard practice. But for everyone else in that room, the recording did something the legal strategy never anticipated. It made Michael Jackson, the global icon, suddenly and unmistakably human. What the recording leaves behind. 15 years later, that recording remains one of the most human artifacts connected to Michael Jackson's death. Not a headline, not a court document, not a chart statistic, but a tired voice describing a hospital he wanted to build for children he would never meet. It forces a question that the legal system was never really equipped to answer. What do we owe someone once their private thoughts become public property? Jackson never intended for that recording to be heard by millions of strangers. And yet, in some strange way, it has become one of the most honest things the public has ever heard from him, more revealing than any interview, any performance, any carefully managed public statement. Maybe that is the real reason this recording continues to resurface, discussed, dissected, and reflected on more than a decade after it was first played in a courtroom. It offers something the tabloids never could. Not scandal, but sincerity. Not spectacle, but a tired man's honest hope that something good might still come from all the pain he carried. There is also something worth noting about the silence that followed the trial. Once the verdict was delivered and Dr. Murray was sentenced, the recording itself was rarely discussed again in mainstream coverage. Headlines moved on to sentencing details, to appeals, to the broader financial disputes surrounding Jackson's estate. The recording, arguably the closest thing the public will ever have to his own unscripted voice in his final weeks, quietly faded into the background of a much louder story. It resurfaces now only in documentaries, retrospectives, and conversations like this one, each time offering a fresh audience the same startling intimacy it offered that courtroom over a decade ago. Conclusion. The recording did not change the outcome of the trial. It did not bring Michael Jackson back. What it did was remind everyone who heard it that behind the icon, the headlines, and the endless public fascination, there was a specific human being with real fears, real exhaustion, and a real unfinished dream. So here's the question worth sitting with. If this recording is the truest version of his voice we have left, one weighted down by exhaustion yet still reaching toward compassion, what does that tell us about who Michael Jackson really was in the end? Was he a fallen icon, or was he simply a man who never stopped hoping, even when his own body had already begun to fail him? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this, grounded in fact, open to complexity, and honest about what we still do not know, are what you come here for, stay connected so you never miss what comes next.